All right, so I hear Judith did a good job of moderating the last 5-minute talk, so I'm going to be your new moderator. So if you break the rules, I'm going to stick Ed Parker on you. So I believe the plan was to have Steve come up and finish his 5-minute talk, but I think he stepped out, or is he back? So we're going to let Steve come up first, and then we'll let Tom go, if that's okay, Tom. And if you're on deck, you can look at the list. So sort of be ready to come up. We're going to limit you to 5 minutes. I'll probably stand up when you have about 30 seconds left. Try and avoid technology. If you have some, that's going to be included in your setup time. So just sort of keep that in mind. Okay, so here's Steve. Come on up.
I have just a couple of things to say. If you have stories or anecdotes or reminiscences of RH being that you'd like to share, please send them to me. That's my email address. And we'll consider putting them in Celebratio in Bing's volume. And as I'd like to give you a sample RH Bing story. This is a story that involves the Hilbert cube. Now, we're going to think of the Hilbert cube as this gigantic infinite dimensional polyhedron. It's 1 unit in this direction, it's a half a unit in this direction, it's a quarter of a unit in this direction, it's an eighth of a unit in the next dimension, 16th, and so on. Everybody got a picture of this? Okay. So one day RH defined Hilbert cube and Hilbert space in his topology class, gave the class a number of problems to work on their own, of course. And the next day, RH came to class, at the beginning of the class, holding something behind his back. And he said to the class, well, you know, last time we talked about the Hilbert cube, and you all have this picture of it, and you know, it's called the Hilbert cube, but I think what I called it is, and he pulled out this object, was an ordinary brick. He said, I call it the Hilbert brick. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Hall. Could we? Yep, thank you. I'm talking about origami and IBL. I've been doing origami since I was 8 years old, and I've been researching origami since 20 years or so. I love using origami for teaching in many different ways, sometimes using inquiry-based learning, discovery learning, or just fun stuff, mainly because origami intersects with so many different branches of mathematics. I tried to make a list here, and I'm not going to go into any of those really, but the big danger, I mean, a lot of people like origami, but one very intimidating thing about it is pictures like this. That's an example of an origami model. It's an origami tessellation. It's one piece of paper, no cuts, just like a kind of a translucent piece of paper that's been folded carefully into a flat tessellation-like pattern. And yay, there's math in that. There's lots of stuff to explore, to study, to learn about those things, and it's really hard to fold. If you're a student who's been introduced to origami math, you're not going to fold that. If you're a faculty member who thinks origami is cool and you want to try using it in your classes, you're not going to be able to fold that. So that's a big barrier towards using origami in classrooms, and it's kind of a shame because origami is so fun, it's hands-on, you pick up paper anywhere and look, this is folded, this thing up here is folded. So what can you do? I just want to give you an example of how you can overcome that barrier with origami, especially for things like inquiry-based learning or discovery-based learning. And I'll do that by way of an example. Many of you probably have heard or know that one of the cool things about origami as a construction tool is that it's more powerful than straightedge and compass. You can trisect angles with origami. Here's how. Yay. Okay. Now, students are not going to come up with this. This is not a good inquiry-based learning activity because if you tell students, hey, guess what? You can trisect angles with origami. Then they could spend days trying to figure that out and never get anywhere. But you can show them this. And then you can ask them, what is going on here that straightedge and compass can't do? What's the difference? What move there is something you can't do with straightedge and compass? That's a simple question. It doesn't require a lot of deep or any deep origami knowledge to wrestle with this question. and it leads to lots of wild math. It's just a simple question like this. If you're going to completely try to explore this, then using nothing more than the equations of straight lines, the quadratic formula, basic high school algebra, or maybe tools like Geometry Sketchpad or GeoGebra, you can develop pictures like this, which illustrate that not only is there a hidden quadratic in that angle trisection method, but a cubic equation. That's the blue line, the cubic there. And those lines there are potential crease lines you could use to try to find the angle trisection. So what that angle trisection method is actually doing is locating a point on that cubic curve. Students, this is totally something students can explore without having advanced origami knowledge, or the faculty member for that matter. Okay, so that's one way that I encourage you, if you think origami is cool, try not to be afraid of it. There are ways you can get beyond that and use origami in lots of creative ways. I did try writing a book on this kind of subject, on using origami in math classrooms of all types. That's what it is. But I'm also happy to talk with anybody about origami because I love it. And so if you want to corner me anytime during this conference, I'm more than happy to sit down and fold with you or talk or go wah or whatever. But there you go. Thank you.
So I'm Ralph Spatzier. I'm at the University of Michigan, where we have one of the 5 IBL centers. And one of the topics we explored at the roundtable this morning is how do we get help with teaching an IBL class, or how can we think about this with other people? And of course, there's all possible online support and whatnot these days, but here's another idea which we've pursued very successfully, I think, at the University of Michigan. In fact, it's due to Mort Brown originally, about 4 years ago, I think, if memory serves right. So we have monthly IBL lunches, about 3-4 a semester, and simply get together and completely informally talk about issues that come up in the classes, issues that come up in other contexts, and just sit there and discuss. So this can be anything from problems that occurred to what is the overall idea of IBL, especially if people come who haven't been exposed to IBL, to, well, how can I become a Project Next fellow? What's Project Next? What are all these other things? What are the resources available? Where are the IBL workshops, etc.? All of these things. So I think that's been a successful idea, and I would like to encourage you to consider that at your own place. You know, lunch can be 2 people. More than 1, I think. Or it can be 20, 30, and we've had typically 10 to 30 people. Well, 10 to 25 people come. And I'm told there may be resources available via EAF small grants, so, but I'm not in charge of that. So second thing I wanted to mention is sort of related idea is, which we have been doing, I have no idea for how long, for many, many years, but there has been a teaching seminar which we run together with the School of Education on math ed purposes. And I think it's proved very significant because, for one thing, you get together with people from the School of Education. I think sometimes there are some problems with the relationships between math departments and School of Education. Having personal contact can help a lot. But in any case, there's a discussion, there's typically a talk about some issue in education, math education specifically, that could come either from the education people or from the math people. I've certainly given talks about IBL in the forms of the seminar. We've had talks about MKT, mathematical knowledge for teachers. In fact, that's where I learned a lot about these ideas. And so anyhow, I would encourage you also to maybe consider having seminars like this with your School of Education. Let me say one more thing. If you are doing this kind of thing and you want outside speakers, there may be possibilities. For example, from the people at the centers or other people involved in IBL or in math ed and IBL in particular. Anyhow, thanks very much.
I've thought of myself as primarily a teacher for about a decade now, and there have been 2, I think, of big changes in my teaching in that time, and I want to share with you what those were. One of them, I'll start with metaphors for what the role of the teacher is. I used to think that my students and I were sort of in the trenches together. And they sort of wanted to think of me as their commander, but I was really more the medic, the sort of. And I think it's an appropriate metaphor, and I still keep it some time. And either last year or 2 years ago, Carol Schumacher gave this metaphor of students as wild horses in a pen. And I love the idea of the students as the wild horse, but I didn't want to be the pen. And so in response to that, I thought a little bit more about it and made a terrible metaphor for myself, in which I was sort of a landscape architect, and they were pebbles, and I designed the layout, and they would roll because it would seem the natural thing to do, because I'm a pebble, so I roll. And I like the idea that you make it their natural behavior, but I don't like the idea that my part of it was hidden. And so a colleague of mine at Augustana suggested another metaphor, a Peter Pan metaphor, where she says, me and my shadow. She's an education faculty. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been okay with that metaphor. And so the big change that this sort of corresponds to is that a big part of my teaching now is not only teaching, the habits of being a mathematician, but teaching about teaching and learning, where I'm explicit about what's going on. So 3 little things that I do related to this. In my geometry course, I like to show a video on the first day of a high school math class that to me seems quite inquiry. And I ask the students, what does that teacher need to be able to do what she is doing? And they essentially define IBL and my course objectives. And so we talk about sort of what learning needs to be happening. I capture a lot of my students' work, and so one thing I ask them to do is to sort of essentially document changes in their own learning and survey themselves about the causes of those learning. And then the final one is that it turns out students really like to read about themselves. So I incorporate some educational research in which the students can process findings that make claims about how they are learning what is going on in their own brains. A big one for me is William Perry's scheme of epistemological development, which I'm actually going to be talking about later this afternoon. But I share this, they read it, we talk about it in class, and then I ask them, okay, so what parts of this class are related to the moving you forward in this progression? I ask them to think from the teacher's perspective. So that's sort of one big change, that I now believe that it is possible for students to understand how learning works in an appropriate enough way to get what is going on. I used to think their perspective was so sort of paradigmatically different from mine that we couldn't converse about it, and I'm happy with that change. The other big one is IBL has been a part of how I thought about teaching for a very long time, and it has a very oral communication, in the moment focus. And I think that's great, but sometimes it can feel tumultuous. Sometimes there's not a good reason other than points for them to pay attention to that material after it's been presented in class. And then there are also the students who don't like speaking in class, and so I wanted to give them a chance to shine. So all of my classes in the last couple of years have had a wiki associated with them, in which the students, after things have been presented, collaborate on producing polished versions of them. And they find it a motivating community-based effort for continuing to think about the clarity of their reasoning and the communication. And so these are the 2 big changes. I believe I can teach them about learning, and I supplement the in synchronous inquiry with what I perceive to be asynchronous inquiry through wikis. And Elizabeth Thorin, wave, and I have recently written a paper that we've submitted to Primus about wiki and course design, and it talked a lot about IBL stuff. So if you're interested, we can give you some resources for those. Thank you.
My name is Carl Seaquist. I'm from Texas Tech University. And we have several professors there and graduate students that have taught more style or more inspired courses for the last many years. Last year I talked, or not last year, it was several years ago, I talked about an online course that I designed and delivered to in-service teachers on the topology of the real line. It worked well. It was based on the notes by J.R. Boyd and Rudy Gord. Last year I taught a course designed for incoming freshman honor students, and I used Tom Ingram's notes entitled The Foundations of Calculus. This class was delivered in the classroom. And I'm going to try to teach this course again next semester, but I'm going to incorporate some of the ideas that I used in the online course and try to use some new ideas to use technology to address some issues that I had the last course I taught. So R.L. Moore had the opportunity to carefully select his students that he thought would derive the maximum benefit from his teaching style. I often don't have this opportunity, which results in students that might not be ready for this approach. Even so, every class has some students that are totally won over by the method, and they learn a tremendous amount. And in fact, like us, many of them have life transformational experiences. Those aren't the students I want to address right now. It's the bottom two-thirds of the class, but I want to address them, the issues, but without hurting the star students. The person that first introduced me in 1967 to IBL was Sam Young. And that's the very same Sam Young that went home as a young student on Christmas break to Big Lake. And there he studied the proofs that had been presented in R.L. Moore's course. And in his study, during his study, he had an epiphany. And the difficulty is that my students often don't have good enough copies of the proofs presented in the class to be able to study them carefully. And this is for several reasons. One is that often their penmanship on the board is so bad that it's impossible to decipher what's written there without an oral description of it. Second of all is many of the students don't have training in taking notes at the same time that they're listening. And because of that, I encourage them, in fact, not to take notes, but to listen and try to understand the arguments. Unfortunately, this leaves them in a situation where any kind of Sam Young type epiphany is impossible for them. So I tried filming the courses and posting these online. Unfortunately, the resolution of our camera was not really sufficient. And even when the writing on the board was legible, you still couldn't read it. So next semester, what I'm going to try to do is, first of all, the students will submit typed versions of all their presentations. I will introduce a wiki like Brian just mentioned, and that'll be made to maintain finished proofs so students can go back and read those proofs. And I'll probably do some experimentation with cooperative development of some sorts of argument. And finally, the class will be filmed, and that film will be posted. So next year, I'll let you know how I do, and if people have any suggestions on how to work these changes, I would be appreciate your feedback. One other thing that I'd like to talk about, if I have a few seconds, and that's a plea for help on a completely different subject. I'm currently working with a totally blind student, and I'd appreciate if anyone has any knowledge about resources for the blind. We've gotten Tom Ingram's notes translated to Braille, and we're starting to work through them, and he is absolutely enthralled with the process. We'd also like to work on, together, transcribing the first book of Euclid's Elements into Braille, so along with the diagram. So if anybody has any advice or experience in that area, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Inga Johnson, and I teach at Willamette University, which is a selective liberal arts school in Salem, Oregon, and I would like to talk to you about what we're doing there in our senior seminar course, which is pretty fun and I think will be interesting to most of you. we're about, just a little bit of context, we're about 2,000 students. We have 8 to 18 math majors graduating a year. And the first requirement of our math majors is to take an Intro to Proofs class, where not only are students learning to write proofs, but they are also learning LaTeX. So they will LaTeX probably an assignment at least every other week, and then they'll use LaTeX throughout the major, which is great. And our senior seminar, historically, when I arrived at Willamette, which was about 9 years ago, was this professor would select a textbook, and the students were given the textbook, they learned the textbook material on their own, and they presented. And my colleague Peter and I said, well, that's great and all. I love the fact that these students are presenting, and they're the ones in front of the class the whole time, but they're given the proofs. They're given the answers. So we thought, well, let's change this. Let's type up the skeleton of a textbook and have them present it, and have them LaTeX their answers, and have them author a textbook that at the end of the semester, they have this collaboratively written textbook that we print out and give to them on the day of their graduation with their names on the front cover. And so that's the gist of our senior seminar. And it's obviously very IBL, although we've never really called it that, but we've managed to get our colleagues on board, and they're all doing this as well. Obviously, the really hard part is writing up that skeleton of the textbook. That took each of us, we all pick our own topics. So we pick something that we're interested in learning about or something that we're familiar with. And we've developed these notes that students then insert their work into. And it's lots of fun. So one of the things that's slightly different from a standard IBL class, perhaps, is that we have scribes. So there are 2 scribes assigned for each week, and those scribes are responsible for typing up the material that's been presented. And if you present, you cannot scribe your own work. So within the textbook, it'll have a lemma or a theorem or something like that, and it'll say presented by Amy, and here's the proof, scribed by Joe. So there'll be credit given to the students that did the presentation, and credit given to the student that does the scribing, so the person that does all the LaTeX. I've typically taught this course in the topic of knot theory, so my students are also learning a lot of Adobe Illustrator to put in all the diagrams and fun things like that. And they, by the end of the semester, are better at Adobe Illustrator than I am, which isn't actually saying much. I'm not very good. So the scribes assessment is I grade the textbook. No one in the class gets a higher grade than the textbook gets. And so the good students are motivated to keep working on the textbook, and so are the weak students, because they might not pass the class if the highest grade is a B+, and they are looking at a C-, but then that's bumped down to whatever it's bumped down to because the textbook has a grade of a B+ or something like that. So I grade the textbook, I grade their scribing, because that's all in the textbook. So I look at how many times they've scribed. I separate their presentations into 2 types, exercises and examples, which in my skeleton I have separated from the theorems and the lemmas and the proofs, and they have to do so many proof problems over the course of the semester. And they fill in this textbook over about 2/3 of the course of the semester, and then the last third they are given the opportunity to do individual projects, and then they'll write a chapter of the book on their individual project, and it has just been really fun. We take pictures and photos of them to put on the front cover of the book. They also scribe quotes that they say to each other throughout the semester, and they have an appendix of their quotes. And it's just been a lot of fun. It's a little just kind of a different way to take the IBL type course and solve that problem of not having a good set of notes. I mean, this totally solves that problem because they're typing it up into a textbook. They're editing it. We have edit days where we don't present any new material. We just go through what's been typed and assign editing duties. Yeah, so if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them later. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Andrew Perry. I want to start by thanking the organizers of this conference, and especially Mr. Lucas and EAF for making it all possible. To continue with Brian Katz's metaphor, I am just another soldier in the trenches or a lieutenant in the trenches, some kind of commander or medic, and I just want to share what's going on in my trench because you probably can't see my trench from your own. So my trench is located in Western Massachusetts. I teach at Springfield College, a small pre-professional type school. We're really well known as the birthplace of basketball. James Naismith invented basketball in 1891 back at Springfield College, which used to be a YMCA school for Christian workers. We're also well known for our health sciences programs and physical education, not so well known for math. So we've got a pretty small math major, and that makes my life in some ways, as you'll see, a little bit more difficult. So I've been teaching abstract algebra as long as I've been at Springfield College, about 15 years. The past 6 or 7 years, I've used Moore method or inquiry-based learning, whichever you prefer to call it. I really found it immensely personally satisfying, the 7 years I've used IBL, although there's been pitfalls and hard times along the way, and I wanted to share some of the difficulties as well as the good things. So I've been using David Clark's group theory notes from the Journal of Inquiry-Based Mathematics, and they've worked pretty well. The way my class goes, every day, well, we start out by reading some material, and then every day there's homework, and if there's 3 or 4 problems, I'll just ask everyone at the beginning of class, who can do number 1, who can do number 2, who can do number 3, and then we'll form sort of a binary grid, yeses and nos, and then I'll figure out who would be the best person to do number 2, if he was the only one who got number 2, etc. And then students present the problems on the board. In most semesters, this has worked really, really well. We have enough of a critical mass of students that are sort of leaders and solve a lot of the problems, and then the others sort of learn from them. This is abstract algebra at Springfield College. Almost all of our math majors go on to be teachers. Almost none of them will use abstract algebra again, from the sense of the content of the course, needing to know what a ring is. So it works out really well. We don't cover as much abstract algebra material, but that's just fine. And so we do also have tests, but most of their grade is based on the problems they solve on the board. So this has been a great time. In the fall of 2013, though, last fall, I ran into a bit of a problem because I had only 8 students, and basically only one of them was any good at learning independently and studying by the Moore method. And one just wasn't good enough. We didn't have a critical mass. In the end, I hope everyone made some progress and all, but there was a lot of weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, and it was a tough time. So I don't know what to do if this should come up again. I don't know if I have to try to scrap the Moore method or modify it more heavily. If any of you have any ideas, I'd be happy to hear from you later. And it looks like I've got about a minute left, and so I want to read some of the comments. I always find Moore method teaching very rewarding. Even in this tough semester, we had a lot of positive comments, but I'll share some negative ones as well. On the negative side, someone said frustration is heavily caused. We are asked to answer theorems and problems where we have little background information on and are not explained to the full extent what the theorem or problem means. Another one said some students always get the answers, others do not. Another one, when there's no help, it's extremely easy to give up. They say there's no help. I've invited them 15 times to come to my office hours, but they're afraid to come to the office hours. Students cannot necessarily study for class if they do not understand the class or know how to prove any of the given problems. They will continually fall behind. Yet another one, I found the Moore method to be very discouraging and frustrating. It makes me upset with myself for not being able to figure the proofs and problems out on my own. Sometimes I feel like I'm completely wasting my time staring at words on a paper trying to make sense of what they're asking for and how to come up with a solution on my own. On the other side, though, there's some positive ones. It challenges students to really sit down and think about how to solve a problem instead of just regurgitating what a teacher had previously taught them. And we are forced to dig deeply into our thoughts and extract ideas that may seem originally too abstract. And there were actually several other great positive comments, but I'm going to be yanked off the stage if I read them to you. So thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shay Fuchs, and I'm from University of Toronto, Mississauga. And I want to tell you about my first IBL course that I taught this year. I haven't taught any IBL course before that, nor I have taken an IBL course as a student. So this was my first experience. And this was a points of topology course. I had about 14 students, and I just want to show you the comments, just so that, to show you that even the first IBL course that you teach can work pretty well. Of course, this is thanks to all the support and the resources that I've got from EAF and the AIBL, the mentor, the funding support, and so on. So let me just show you a few of the comments that I got at the end of the course. And I didn't edit them. I didn't remove any of the comments, so you don't think that I selected the good ones. And I didn't even correct the spelling mistakes. Okay? So these are not mine. So this is the first comment, very good. It's not very informative, but this was the first comment. The second comment, the instructional technique was unique. It allowed for students to teach and learn together. So this was pretty nice to see. Here's another comment. I wish that we had spent more time introducing sections. The presentations are a great way to demonstrate our learning. Okay. The next comment, I thought the instruction was great as we were all able to participate. So this was a nice thing to see that they liked about this method. The next comment, it was a different style of instructing that I enjoyed after a while. Okay. The next comment, okay, this is longer, but I would like to talk about the highlighted sentence. IBL is a great learning method and should be implemented, if possible, in earlier years. This is a fourth-year course. We cannot really use IBL in earlier courses because our courses are huge. First and second-year courses are huge. More than 60, 100 students per class, so we cannot really use IBL. Next comment. The one thing I enjoyed about this course is the fact that through extensive presentation, I was able to understand the concepts much better. So this was really nice to see. The next one, the teaching method was good for me. It made me understand the concept much easier. So this was another nice comment. And again, I didn't remove any of the comments. They're all here. And then this one, I like having students' presentation as part of the course because it helped me understand the proofs better. Of course, they want more lectures, but that didn't happen. It's not going to happen. This is a really long one, so I'm going to read the last sentence. Student-centered learning was a smart teaching method, should be implemented in early years at university. So they really felt that it's a good method. And I think, okay, I didn't highlight here. There's nothing really talking about IBL. Okay, I'm going to skip to the next one. I really like the IBL method that was used. And then I'm going to skip to the next sentence. I have taken Math 378, that's real analysis, before. So I have some knowledge of topology, but I felt that after taking Math 405, which is the topology course, I understand topology a lot more. And then this is the last comment, which I really like. IBL allowed us to learn on our own. Shay created a safe environment for us to make mistakes and learn from them, which was really the purpose of IBL. So I'm showing these comments just to try and encourage all the newbies in the audience. Don't be afraid to try. Even the first time can go pretty well. And again, there is a lot of support and resources on the AIBL website and from the EAF. So that's about it. Thank you very much.